But bro, sunlight's just got to hit the eyeballs. Just get sunlight on the eyeballs, bro.
Shall we start fighting? I was going to go grab a quick drink and then we'll get into it. I don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, let's do it. I wanted to open up with a question for you, but I guess.
Oh, yeah. No, totally. Let's open it up.
So my question for you is, because you go so hard with your routine of optimizing information consumption and production and whatnot. So you have an intense routine. And so I've been becoming increasingly disenchanted with my podcast consumption routine. I really feel like it's getting to the point where I'm not satisfied with that I'm actually learning that much when I'm listening to a podcast. It's beginning to feel like pure mental masturbation, basically.
Interesting.
Like I listen to someone and I think I enjoy it mostly if I like their personality or something. So I'll listen to like Very Bad Wizards. I like them. But in terms of like listen to a podcast and then, you go in not knowing much, you come out with an informed view. That basically never happens to me. Because I always feel skeptical that I'm getting both sides of the story, et cetera. And I've delved into enough topics now where I realize like very rarely do you get the full picture from one podcast, unless it's one of our podcasts. Then you get the full picture, you get the full download, and you go from zero knowledge to 100%. Exactly.
Present company excluded, obviously.
But people can't, they can't all be as intellectually gifted as we are.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, I'm sort of less enthusiastic about listening to podcasts and stuff these days. I've transferred more to audiobooks and whatnot because I feel like there, at least, it might be a little bit more dry because you don't get the conversational element, but you might get more of the full picture, right? And like more of the nuances and stuff. So anyway, I'm just kind of curious, like why do you think you listen to podcasts? And what's your podcast routine like? Do you think you actually learn a lot from podcasts? What's your podcast philosophy?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't have one so much. So my interests continuously drift. There's certain podcasts that I always follow because I like the thinkers. So John McWhorter, and Glenn Laurie, and Sam Harris and Coleman Hughes are pretty top of the list. Other podcasts I just tune in when there's particular guests. What have I been doing recently? So I've been trying to go into entirely different podcast ecosystems because I feel like I've kind of tapped out most of the ecosystem I'm currently in. And so my new hobby horse right now is trying to explore this like science bro ecosystem with like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia. So I like finding podcast ecosystems that are completely separate from the ones that I'm currently in and exploring those because that's where I find I learn more. So I think I would posit a guess that you're kind of just well saturated in your current podcast ecosystem. And the stuff that you're learning there is stuff you have already kind of heard already enough before. And that's usually the time when I move to other things. So one direction I'm going isn't this health stuff because there's certain alarm bells that are ringing quite strongly, but I haven't totally pinpointed it yet.
Epistemologically speaking or personally?
Yeah, so Andrew Huberman, I am really not liking that guy, but people love Huberman, but I don't have a coherent argument yet. So I'm starting to have this little research project of trying to figure out this new ecosystem of the Hubermanites. And then I wanted to talk to you about that later. I was actually going to mention this to you offline, that we should start going into that direction because there's a lot of appeals to authority. And then there's like good information mixed with like just shit information. And he continuously says things like studies show. And then when he goes on Joe Rogan and he talks about the power of like cold baths, it took me 2 seconds to find that studies show that it can actually like kill you if you don't do it right. But he does it up like I guess there's like the Cold Society of America. I don't really remember what their title is, but it's just not something that you should just recommend cavalierly because if you have certain health risks and you go into like an ice plunge, you can like go into cardiac arrest. But Huberman just doesn't mention how studies show that when it's something that he likes a lot. So I'm really quite interested in trying to study Huberman and this little closed ecosystem because everyone cites each other. Like, so we're in our closed ecosystem where we talk about Sam Harris, we talk about Glenn Laurie, and everyone kind of knows each other there, but we don't talk about these other guys, right? So these other guys have a little closed loop that they're all talking to each other about. And so now I'm trying to go in there and try to figure out what the hell's going on.
But bro, sunlight's just got to hit the eyeballs. Yeah, exactly. Just get sunlight on the eyeballs, bro.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, man, maybe the effect size is microscopic, but and then the way he talks, it's like there's no delta whatsoever between what you would learn from him and what you'd learn from ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is like now my control for if you're an interesting personality or not. If you're basically just getting pure ChatGPT stuff, then you're getting like the mainstream. That's fine. It's useful. But when I listen to Sam Harris's opinion on something, you're not going to hear something ChatGPT would say. But Huberman, it's just ChatGPT. It's just like, here's what the mainstream science says about XYZ. And again, that's fine. Okay. But then he's like super down with supplements and not nearly skeptical enough about that. And he just has a couple subtle things that he does when he speaks that I don't like. Like he insists on putting doctor in front of all of his guests. It's just like a subtle appeal to authority, but like, fine. So anyway, so back to your original question.
Do you just want doctor before your name on this podcast?
No, I fucking hate that term. I definitely don't want that. No, I do not want that at all. Like, I never say the letter PhD unless it's like I have to, I don't know, go through border security and I want them to know I'm not like an enemy or something. But yeah, so that's one little ecosystem. The other ecosystem I'm trying to go into, which I haven't started yet, is the Red Scare people. So Sarah Hayter and I forgot her co-hosts. They have a podcast. And they're talking about the Red Scare people, and they don't like the Red Scare people, but I don't know what the Red Scare people are talking about. And so I'm trying to research that little bubble as well. And then the third thing I'm going into is just old episodes of Fire and Line. So I just kind of turned the YouTube channel into a podcast. So my answer to your question, like, do you feel like you're learning anymore? With the podcast that I follow regularly, no, I just feel like I'm keeping up to date. But now I'm starting to just move into different kinds of podcasts. And so like the podcasts I learn the most are when there are people talking about a field that I know nothing about. So like I remember I dove into like the Partially Examined Life podcast, where they would just go head first into like all sorts of crazy philosophy when I was like 10 years ago, and I didn't know what the word consequentialism meant. I didn't know what epistemology was and stuff. And just getting immersed in the language of a new community talking about something I found to be very powerful. So for the current podcasts, I'm just decently immersed that I just kind of check in when there's interesting guests and keep up to date with the what's happening there. But I don't feel like it's too enriching in my education at this moment, but that's why I'm trying to find different areas. So I don't know if that's satisfying or not, but that's kind of how I've been treating podcasts. But yeah, if you're not feeling like you're learning, then do something else. Yeah.
Well, no, it's more skepticism that I was learning at any point.
Oh, really?
I'm sort of convinced that it was mostly like mental masturbation the whole time. And
that's interesting. Oh, yeah.
The learning came later when I would sit down and really try and work something out. Actually kind of research it, sit down and read various articles about it. And I don't know if that's just because I'm slow, and so learning things over audio is hard, and you have to digest things a million miles an hour, and listening on 2 times speed is obviously not helpful for that. Or if that's just people are generally sort of tricking themselves that they're learning that much over podcasts.
Well, so that's funny because I feel that way about audiobooks, but maybe it's just the way that we prefer to listen to and ingest certain material. Like with audiobooks, I kind of glaze out because the text has been written to be read, and then when it's like spoken out loud, it just doesn't land for me as well. But the thing I get so much out of podcasts is I hear somebody say something that lands with me, and then I start saying it to all my friends and start having conversations about it. And then those conversations lead me to entirely new areas. And so I'll say something that I heard on a podcast. So the one that I've been talking about recently is just, I think we might have talked about this either online or offline, is I heard about Andre Agassi's book, The Tennis Player Who Hates Tennis. And I heard about that randomly on a podcast and then read it. And then I've been talking to a bunch of my friends about it. But now we're having these really interesting conversations about like pursuing something that you hate and it's making you miserable, but yet you can't stop doing it. And then I learned so much from these like secondary conversations with people that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have that conversation with had I not heard this thing in the podcast. And so like so much of what you and I talk about, like the seeds of these conversations have been from different podcasts. And then it just opens up these new kinds of questions and territory. And so for me, that's where I get so much value. It's like hearing something that's interesting, saying an interesting thing to somebody, and then having a conversation about that thing that we wouldn't have had that conversation about is where I get so much fulfillment out of the podcasts.
All right. I got nothing more than that. I was just curious.
Yeah. I think the optimizing the information consumption thing, I really think that should be best seen through the lens of just like me procrastinating on doing stuff. So like it's mainly just a way to procrastinate in such a way that I kind of feel like I might be still doing something of value, but I don't really know how valuable any of this shit it is. It's just a form of procrastination, and that's probably the best way to view my optimization of information consumption. But
well, speaking of procrastination, let's get talking, baby.
Sweet. Let me go grab a drink, and I will come back and let's get into it. Welcome to the Increments Podcast with Ben and Vaden. Oh shit, no, let me try that again. Fuck, I feel so awkward doing the formal podcast stuff, man. It's just like, it just breaks the illusion that we're just talking to ourselves. But okay, let's try that again.
Actually, a listener was driving. I met up with listener Jesse. Shout out to Jesse, who was driving from California he's moving to Philly. So he was driving through Pittsburgh, and we met up, went for a climb and stuff. And he said that we should actually do this because he only recently learned to tell us apart. Apparently, we actually sound quite similar, which blows my mind. Because I don't think we sound similar at all. But people have said in the past that it's hard to tell who is who. Yeah. So maybe we should start introducing ourselves. Anyway, I was very resistant for the listeners out there. There's been some drama behind the scenes about if we should do this or not. And I'm always on the no side. But now I'm slowly being edged out by our audience,
Well, let's just try it again. Let's keep the failed attempt in too, so that people know how awkward this kind of stuff makes us. But so I'm Vaden, a senior research scientist in machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is my boy.
Doctor.
Don't you dare say that. This is my boy, Benny. I want to like make up middle names for you. For whatever reason, I was lying in bed thinking it was just be funny to make up a new middle name every single time we do
every
this.
Single time.
Yeah, just like a new middle name. I don't know why, but it just amused me.
But never kind of explicitly say it. Just every time you have a new middle name.
Yeah.
Would be like,
like Benny, the Destroyer of Worlds, Chug, for example, who is at Carnegie Mellon University and is kicking ass and taking names. And we have a Twitter, we have a YouTube, a Discord. Email us at any time to get access to the Discord. We just started a Patreon too, so give us money, honey. And a Instagram. We're trying to work on Instagram as well. I think all of these various platforms are available at Increments Podcast, plus the Twitter handle or whatever. And that's the first and last time. We'll just alternate. I hate doing this kind of shit. But
and by we are working on Instagram, we mean actually someone else. Yeah, it's very nice and internet savvy is actually working on our Instagram.
Yeah, we don't know if she wants to be publicly named yet, so we'll hold her name for now. But if she does, then we'll introduce her to y'all. But so we had a disagreement last episode that then spilled into the Discord and then spilled into our DMs too, dude. So I was like, okay, this is a deep disagreement. We can't just run away from it. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, just kind of reopen that and see if we can get more on the same page. Do you want to remind the audience what the disagreement was about as a way to kick things off? There's
also an interesting phenomenon with this disagreement where it seems that most people actually have a pretty strong opinion about it. Yeah. So for instance, Jesse, who I met up with, I was just talking about, was strongly on your side. But I think Cam and Rich are more strongly on my side. People in the Discord
honestly,
were chiming in. Anyway, so people seem to have some opinions. So the disagreement was kindled with the statement, all thought is problem solving. Yeah. And Vaden said, yes, of course it is. And Ben vehemently disagreed and said, no, of course it's not. And then it became a pure chaotic system from there. And we're not sure what happened, but I think you're still, I don't think either of us has really budged that much. You said we converged. I started yelling at you in the Discord, and then you took your foot off the gas and said, I think we agree now. But it turns out we didn't actually agree.
Okay. So let me try to see things from your perspective first. And then, so I've been thinking a lot more about this, and I think I can try to flesh out my side more. Ironically, I think I'm now stronger on my own side than I was when I first recorded that episode. But
the power of conversation.
Yeah. But okay, so first, so let me see if I just understand your perspective first. So first, I think you just think it's flat out false. So it's just not true. That's like the main opinion. So like I think from your view, you're solving problems when like you have a flat tire, or your roof is leaking, or you're working on a theorem, or you're trying to figure out where to go to school. But when you're reading a book or watching TV or talking to your partner or going for dinner, that's not problem solving. That's just other stuff in life.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it might be. Those situations might involve solving lots of problems. You're going to dinner with your partner. There are many situations where you might indeed be trying to solve a problem.
Okay,
but,
so
you're making a very strong claim by saying all thought is problem solving. I'm saying no, not all. There exists some thoughts that have nothing to do with solving problems. That's
so one example would be the TV, like watching TV. I don't want to put examples in your
mouth. Sometimes if you're passively watching TV, maybe I think I'm going to move away from the TV thing because I think there's a huge conflation of problems in the actual TV show with problems in your brain. So the example I'm going to be relying on now is what I use in the Discord, which is you're having lunch with a friend and you're sitting there eating a meal and you're happy and you're shooting the shit. Your friend pushes his glass across to you and says, "Oh, taste this drink." It's some new cocktail maybe. You take a sip and you think, "Oh, that was tasty."
Okay, cool.
And so I claim that thought was not solving a problem. It's just a passive sort of observation about what your taste buds were doing. And that's not to say it's not theory laden, et cetera, et cetera. Deutschians, don't start flipping your shit at me quite yet. But I think those kind of thoughts, you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to claim that those kind of solitary thoughts are problem solving.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Okay. So I would say, so trying to understand the different threads of your side. So I think that's like maybe the main thread obviously is just you disagree at that level. But I think there's other stuff going on too. So I think that you also, when I said that all thought is problem solving, you and I think Chris Lovegren are viewing this kind of through the lens of like a dude over applying his framework. So just like the crit rats on Twitter saying everything is problem, everything is conjecture, yada, yada, yada. It's like waters down the phrase problem to say that everything is problem solving. And it just kind of is irritating from this perspective of like, seeing everything through a single lens. Is that an accurate summary? Is that part of what's going on your side, or is that just pure hallucination on my side?
No, that could be part of it. But I think, the reason I think that sort of attitude is annoying is because I think it's wrong. So it really just comes down to me thinking it's wrong. Right? Okay, I could find that sort of thing annoying, but think it's correct. And then I'd have rebuke of it. So it's more so just comes down to, I don't think it's useful or correct.
Okay, nice. Good.
This perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was trying to write things that Ben doesn't like about my side of this perspective. And with your adjustments, I feel like I'm close, modulo some corrections. And then I guess you also dislike that I'm basically making like an irrefutable case. So no matter what example you come up with, I will be able to contort the definition of problem such that the example actually is an example of problem solving. And that's kind of just a further reason why it's almost false by definition, because to make such an irrefutable case, that's just like a no-go zone. You can't do that. And that's like places where your alarm bells are ringing as well. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah, I can see where you're going with this, but sure, I'll concede that point. Yeah. I know you're going to start drawing the whole metaphysical side.
I'm not, because I did that in the first. No, I did that in the first episode, so I won't go that too far, but it is interesting, and that's something I do want to talk about at some point. But
I think that is a big problem, and was highlighted, for instance, in the Discord when I said, "What about this drink thing?" And you said, "Oh, aha!" In the background, you actually were thirsty, and so you taking a sip from your friend was actually solving some sort of problem. And it's like, well, okay, if you can invent, you have unlimited degrees of freedom to invent a background story about any scenario I give you, then obviously you can contort anything into seeming like it's solving a problem, but I just don't think that's true if people were to just observe thoughts day to day, and not all of them are geared towards solving problems. Some of them are annoying. Some of them are just fun and friendly and funny.
Yeah. Okay, nice. So good. So I'm doing a decent job. And then I think the last thing, or at least the last thing I identified that you disliked about my view, is something about maybe the way I was using the phrase lenses, because I think at some point in the background, in our private messages to each other, you're like, dude, you can't just keep having it fucking both ways. You can't talk about it being true and then also being a lens that you just switch out of. And you can't simultaneously say it's always true. But then when you're challenged, you say, well, dude, it's just a lens. And so you're kind of just like, you're saying everything, and then you're also saying nothing, because whenever I'm challenged, I switch to calling it a lens. Exactly. And that's kind of like an irritation. So I think I understand your side decently well. And so I was trying to dissect what the problem is. And I think that I was actually re-listening to our episode on David Chapman, and we talked about implicit definitions, right? And so I think part of the reason so I should say I agree with a lot of your side, but I think part of the reason why we view this so differently is like I think we just have a different like implicit definition of what a problem is. And so when I say that word, I think I'm thinking about something slightly different than what you're thinking about. And that's kind of intrinsic to the nature of the word problem because like a problem is a very vague and nebulous thing. Like what actually counts as a problem, right? Like, is this conversation right now a problem? Are we problem solving? Are we just talking? You could go both ways on that, right? And so I think there's some nebulosity. Nice. I can actually use that term.
Chapman was right all along.
So I think there's some intrinsic nebulosity. So I first want to just like maybe tease apart the word problem into a couple different notions. And under one definition of problem, I totally agree with you. And on a slightly more general definition of problem, I agree with me, I guess. Okay, so some of the material that I'm drawing from in this conversation, I'll just refer people to. I sent it to you. I don't know if you read it or not, but so the first chapter of Popper's book, All of Life is Problem Solving, he goes into this subject, and so I'll talk a bit about that book, as well as the intro of his other book, In Search of a Better World. And so in both of these books, Popper basically generalizes the notion of problem quite significantly. So when he talks about problem, he talks about this basically an amoeba up to Einstein, all are problem solving. So he makes a strong claim that all of life is problem solving. And when he says that, what he means by problem isn't what most people mean in standard everyday usage, but he's talking about problems as almost like disappointed expectations is I think what he uses. So you expect one thing and you get a different thing. And that is the problem. So an amoeba is swimming around its little amoeba fluid and is expecting a sugar solution and then runs into a wall. And then its little amoeba prongs go to the left and looks for more sugar solutions and then finds it and then moves around. And so from the perspective of the amoeba, it's all just trial and error. It's trying this direction, not finding sugar, trying this direction, finding sugar. And then he scales it all the way up from the amoeba through to like plants. So under Popper's conception, plants are also problem solving in the sense that their roots are digging into the ground and it's like a trial and error where the roots are going to go to find the most nutrients. And so with that setup, I just want to read a couple quotes, if that's okay, just because I'm not trying to argue against you. I'm trying to just fill in the background about what I'm thinking about when I say the word problem, if you accept that. If that's cool. So this comes from the preface to In Search of a Better World, Popper's book. And it's the first paragraph, basically. And he says, men, animal, plants, even unicellular organisms are constantly active. They are trying to improve their situation, or at least avoid its deterioration. Even when asleep, the organism is actively maintaining the state of sleep. The depth, or else the shallowness of sleep is a condition actively created by the organism, which sustains sleep, or else keeps the organism on the alert. Every organism is constantly preoccupied with the task of solving problems. These problems arise from its own assessment of its condition and of its environment, conditions which the organism seeks to improve. Continuing. So now I'm going to switch to All of Life is Problem Solving, where he says the following. So referring to the procedure of trial and error, which is the only mechanism by which an organism can solve its problems. You try a solution and see if it works. At bottom, this procedure seems to be the only logical one. It's also the procedure that a lower organism, even a single cell amoeba, uses to try to solve its problems. In the case we speak of testing movements through which the organism tries to rid itself of a troublesome problem. Higher organisms are able to learn through trial and error how a certain problem should be solved. We may say that they too make testing movements, mental testings, and that's to learn is essentially to try out the testing movements after another until one is found that solves the problem. We may compare the animal's successful solutions to an expectation and hence to a hypothesis or theory. For the animal's behavior shows us that it expects, perhaps unconsciously or dispositionally, that in similar cases, the same testing movements will again solve the problems in question. Okay, so I'll pause there and I'll just kind of summarize why I read those quotes. So when Popper talks about all of life being problem solving, he's using the word problem in a much more general sense. And so he's making the strongest possible claim that all of biological life is intrinsically set up to solve problems. This is not the same as saying that rocks or stars or dust solve problems. So it's not saying that everything is problem solving, but it's saying that biological life is problem solving. So if you buy that, I don't know if you do or not, but if you buy that, then it seems to follow pretty immediately. Then, of course, all of thinking would be problem solving as well. I wouldn't say that all of consciousness is problem solving. So I would distinguish between thinking and consciousness because I think the experience of seeing red is not problem solving. That's just an experience, or coldness or touch is not problem solving. But I think that thoughts, at least my thoughts, are constantly about trying to solve problems in the broadest possible sense, where you expect one thing and you get a different thing, and then you try to figure out what that is. So in the broad sense of problem solving, I think a conversation or reading a book or seeing stand-up comedy is problem solving, because it's about having your expectations be either met or disappointed, and then adapting to that. If you take the more colloquial notion of the word problem, which is, I think, the way that you were using that word, which is totally fair, then of course it doesn't make sense to say everything's problem solving, because just having a drink of water passed you is not the problem, in the sense that if your spouse says, "Did you encounter any problems today?" you would not say yes because someone passed you a glass of water. So the first way I want to try to bring us a little bit closer is just to recognize that the word problem, we were just talking past each other because I was using it in kind of the Popperian epistemological sense, which is in this broad disappointed expectations. You read a book, you expect the next sentence to relate to the first sentence, and then you read it and it's slightly different than what you expected. That is a disappointed expectation. That's a problem in the general Popperian sense, but not in the specific sense. So, okay, let me pause there and see what you do with that.
I mean, yeah, sure. I guess I don't have much to say. If you're going to define problem as your brain constantly has expectations for what's going to happen next, then you seem to just be defining the predictive processing paradigm of neuroscience, which says that that's what our brains are doing all the time. They're just constantly predicting things. And presumably this is how animal brains, fish brains, et cetera, develop as well. So if you just define a problem as that, that's like defining problem as evolution in some sense, or you just say evolution is a problem.
Well, it's the trial and error thing is key, right? So you try, and then once you've learned how to do something, then you're no longer viewing it a problem, and then you no longer have to guess the solution. You can just keep doing it over and over again. So it's not just defining it in such a way that all the things disappear, but it is definitely defining problem in such a way that it's kind of irrefutable. And this is
but you still have expectations about situations, even if the problem is quote unquote solved. You always still have an expectation about what's going to happen.
Well, so an interesting thought occurred to me. So take the example of learning how to ride a bike, right? So when you first learn how to ride a bike, you're thinking about it a lot. It's a huge problem. You're constantly thinking about it. After you've learned how to ride a bike, you are no longer thinking about how to ride a bike. So what's uniquely interesting is that as soon as the problem has been solved, you no longer think about it. I think that's a key insight in the sense that once it's no longer a problem, you stop thinking about it.
Consciously.
But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about are all thoughts problem solving, right? So I'm talking about conscious thoughts. So then it just sinks into your body, into your muscle memory. And now it's no longer an expectation. And now it's no longer something that you're thinking about anymore. It's just something you're doing. So now your horizon of what you're thinking about now moves to the next frontier of problem, because maybe you're working on a difficult song on the piano, or you're learning how to ride a bike. After you've learned that, then you no longer have to think about it because you're no longer solving any problems in that domain, and you're thinking about the next horizon of problems. So it's not entirely vacuous, but I want to fully recognize that, yes, you are absolutely right. That Popper is basically defining problem in such a way that he can't be wrong. And that's where it gets to this irrefutable stuff. So yes, you're totally right. I'm not denying that he is doing that. But the question is, through that move, can you still get value out of it? And that's where I think, start to get more to the metaphysical stuff, but we don't have to go there yet. But yes, you are absolutely right that he's basically defining problem in such a way that he can't be wrong. But I want to claim that that's still sometimes a valuable thing to do.
Yeah, I think I agree, perhaps with the exception of the step that goes, if all the steps of evolution are problem solving, or if all life is problem solving in terms of learning behaviors, than all of thought is. I'm not actually sure about that step or how you would make that case.
Yeah, so exactly. So that's why I want to now go to a bit more about what I was saying before. And so when I introspect, like, this is not a debate point. This is just me trying to genuinely be honest. I think it is a true statement that my brain only is ever thinking about problems. In your sense, and not in the Popperian sense, in your sense. So when I'm watching TV, like, let's get rid of the word problem. Let's say all thinking is figuring stuff out. Okay. All thinking is just figuring stuff out. When I'm talking to you, I'm trying to figure out what you're saying. When I'm watching a show, I'm trying to figure out what the show is about. When I'm reading a book, I'm trying to figure out what the book is about. When I am going to work, I'm either not thinking about my footsteps, because that's not a problem. I'm thinking about what I have to say when I meet my boss. All of my thoughts are just trying to figure shit out. Maybe when I'm meditating, I am trying to figure out how to meditate because it's so goddamn hard. It's not easy. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. If you pass me a drink of water and I unconsciously, reflectively grab it and drink it, then I'm not thinking about that. But if I drink it and I say it's good, then either it's just basically a reflex that I haven't thought about, or if I actually think about it, then I'm in that context. It's just the tiny little microscopic problem I'm solving is just being polite. And so the other thing I want to introduce is this notion that I think that when you think about problems, you're thinking about difficult and consequential problems, which is obviously fair. But there's all sorts of problems that are not consequential and not difficult, that are basically just automatic, that probably don't even rise to the level of problem in your mind because it's just obvious, right? But it is as true as I could possibly say, with the exception of me being completely deluded about my own thought process, that I'm constantly just thinking about trying to figure shit out. And as soon as something is figured out, I'm no longer thinking about it, like riding a bike or strumming the guitar. And then I start thinking about it again when I try to teach it. And then I realize, oh shit, I'm trying to strum this guitar, but I actually don't know how to explain that. And now I'm thinking about that again. And so I'm just genuinely curious. Would you agree? Would that be an accurate characterization on your side?
No, I don't think so at all.
So interesting. So that's just a difference
big
between
subjective
us.
disagreement here.
Yeah.
No, I don't feel like that at all. Which is why I was trying to prod your intuitions with the watching TV, because I thought that was a clear example of when I feel like depends on the show, right? There's some shows, you watch like an old film or something and you're there to try and really analyze it, etc. But there are certain forms of entertainment where I feel like I am much more passive. And this isn't to say that something like predictive processing isn't true, but I don't feel like it rises always to the conscious level. So people often say why stuff is funny is because it violates expectations. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that's true. But when I'm watching a comedy show, I'm trying to even picture what it would mean to be trying to figure stuff out if you're watching like a comedy special. So someone delivers one line. Are you literally trying to guess what's he going to say next? What's he going to say next?
So when someone tells me a joke at a party, I'm trying to figure out the punchline before they get to it. Yeah, I am. That's what I'm doing.
So I never feel like that. I feel like I'm waiting and sort of in anticipation with other people, and I don't feel like I'm trying to get there first. I feel like I'm totally.
But if I'm telling you a story, and all of a sudden the story goes from a 10-second story to a 20-second story to like a 3-minute story. And at a certain point, you're going to be like, where is he going with this? Like, what is he trying? And at that point,
at a certain point,
to solve a problem or to understand something, you have to first just understand, right? So I think that so much of what you're describing is the initial process of understanding, where you're just listening and you're just understanding. And you're understanding the setup of the joke. You're understanding maybe the speech patterns of the comedian, so that when the punchline is delivered, you get it, right? And understanding something is like integral to problem solving, because you can't solve a problem unless you understand it. And so I fold that into the problem solving process, because that is a prerequisite to solving a problem. You have to understand. So you have to listen. You have to think about, what is this person saying? Does it make sense compared to all the other stuff that I know about? And so you're listening, right? And so please continue describing your experience watching.
I'm kind of confused what that had to do with anything, to be honest. Like, I don't
because to solve a problem, you have to first understand what the person is saying. And that is, I think, what you are doing when you say the word passive. You're just consuming their information and listening to what they're saying so that you understand what the punchline is going to be. And that process, from your perspective, is not problem solving. But from my perspective, that is included in what I mean when I say problem solving, because to problem solve, you have to first understand what the problem is.
No, I think there's a bigger difference here, because I know what it does feel like to be constantly guessing about what the person's going to say. So for instance, this happens often when we're talking, when I'm on a more active mode of conversation, or especially if I'm in an academic environment with an advisor or something. So we're talking about research, and then they'll start going down some path. And I'm, you can't help but thinking like, okay, where are they going with this? And then I have an actual bad habit in research of finishing people's sentences, which I'm actually trying to do less, but precisely because it's just subconsciously, I'm also trying to get there, and I'm also trying to solve that problem. And, the best collaborations happen when you're both kind of solving problems at the same rate, and you're seeing things almost at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. So I do know what it's like to be engaged in a conversation where you are actively trying to solve problems. And my point is that subjectively, that state and a state of watching a comedy special or whatever feels extremely different to me, to the point where I'd want to say the second one, I'm not actively trying to solve problems. I'm not actively trying to guess what they're saying. At some point, this is going to bottom out in pure subjective experience of what we're doing when we're watching things.
I think
our brains are just wired in different ways here. But comedy is an interesting example here, because people do say often like you're violating expectations. So I don't doubt that subconsciously I have an expectation about like sort of in which direction something's going to go. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but I don't feel consciously as if I have an array of possible options in my head, and I think, it's going to be one of these things. And then it's not that thing, and I say, "Fuck, that was funny," because I thought it was one of five things, and etc. So I don't really know what to say beyond that.
No, I think we're converging quite quickly, because I agree with everything that you said. And I know when I'm in guess the punchline mode, compared to just like watching TV and eating popcorn. So if you want to put guess the punchline mode, if you want to call that problem solving, and other states of thinking not problem solving, then we agree totally. I'm not always in guess the punchline mode. So if that's what you mean by problem, then we totally agree. I'm not doing that all the time. If you allow me to use the more general notion of problem solving, which you may not allow, but that is partially how I'm thinking about this, in the sense of what is the unifying thing that all organisms do, from amoebas up to Einstein. In that more broad sense of problem solving, and by all means say I'm just changing the definition to win the argument, fair enough. But I was thinking about problems based on the book that I read well before the argument started. And so it's more just a failure of communication on my part to highlight that was partly how I'm thinking about it. But in that sense, I do feel like I'm solving problems, because when I read a book, I'm trying to see how the next sentence coheres with the previous one. And that's just it's a different mode of problem solving. It's just a different.
I don't like the example of reading a book, because I agree that most of the time when you're reading a book is quite an active mental activity, much more so than watching TV is for me. So I do agree that when you're reading a book, you often are actively kind of.
So that's why I just want to just make a distinction between like harder problems and easier problems. If you're reading a children's book, right? It's going to be much easier, maybe much closer to stand-up comedy compared to if you're reading Tolstoy. But so it's a harder problem to read Tolstoy than it is to read a children's book. And I would just put stand-up comedy on the children's book end of things. But like at a certain point, the problems become so simple that you just want to say that they're not problems anymore. And I just want to say, well, no, let's just keep a more general view of what a problem is. And what I would say is not a problem is exactly the stuff that you no longer have to think about. The riding a bike example. Once you, or driving a car. So driving a car, you have to think a lot about it when you first start doing it. And then after you have fully learned it, that's the point where you no longer need to think about it. And now you can think about having a conversation with your partner. And then a tree falls and all of a sudden you have to think about it again, right? But as soon as something is fully learned and is no longer a problem, then you don't need to think about it anymore. And that's part of the reason why I'm saying that all thought is problem solving. But recognizing that problems come in different degrees of strength, different degrees of difficulty. And if they're so easy, then you can basically just like not think at all and just listen to comedy and laugh about it. Then I get it. You want to say that's no longer problem solving, and fine. So we can just converge totally by defining that to be no longer problems. But I think it does also make sense to take a different lens. So let's bring back the lens thing. So now the lens is like, when I'm talking to Helena about if I've encountered any problems in my day, I'm not going to use this more niche Popperian definition. But when I'm thinking in epistemological mode, then I'm going to switch the lens and switch to a more general, expansive view of what a problem is. And in that sense, I would say yes. And both are true, but both are only true and useful in particular contexts. Okay, let me return that to you.
So you have meditated before, right? Or you used to meditate, or do you do meditate?
I meditate in stressful periods of my life.
Maybe this example won't work then. So because if you're stressed, probably you're thinking about something in particular. But often if you meditate, you'll sit there and you're trying to empty your mind. You're trying to focus on one thing, whatever. It depends on the strand of meditation. And you'll notice pretty quickly that your mind is just bombarded with thoughts about random fucking things, what you're doing that day, or you'll remember something with embarrassment, or you'll think about how something tasted, or whatever it was. So what's going on here on your view? All of these are things in your subconscious that you're actually trying to solve, and it's each one of these thoughts is trying to solve a particular problem, and you just don't know what it's trying to solve, and it's just kind of annoying at the time. You're like, fuck off, I don't want to think about what I did last Tuesday. But obviously somewhere in your subconscious, you're trying to solve the problem of something that happened to you last Tuesday, or what are all these weird distracting thoughts doing?
Yeah. So like when I'm lying in bed, and I'll get back to the meditation thing in a sec, but basically when I'm lying in bed, when I'm just thinking about whatever, it's constantly, so typically it's either like arguments I'm going to have with you or with my friend Trey about Andrew Huberman, or so it's 15 different arguments I'm simultaneously having with 15 different people, and all the different threads that could possibly happen. So I'm constantly gaming out arguments in my head always. So that's the first thing. And then like research problems are the other thing. So then it depends on what I'm more excited about. So if it's research problems, I'm thinking about code, or how to implement this thing, or how to do this math thing, or whatever. Or it's like relationship stuff and family stuff. Like how do we sell our car? How do we... we're now trying to figure out housing and mortgages and stuff. So I'm thinking about that kind of thing. So so it's basically always that. And so when I'm trying to meditate, I'm trying to stop doing that. But the things that keep shooting into my head are little problem fragments from stuff that I'm trying to consciously ignore at that time. And that's because I now have this new master problem of trying to stop all the problem solving. And that's problems being interpenetrated with these other problems I'm trying to not solve at the moment. And so that is literally just what my thought process is all the time, every day. Yes. And
I can understand why you took the perspective you did. If that's how you think, if all the time, every day, you're just thinking about either arguments or things. That's interesting.
But I love it. Like but I get happiness out of that. So it's like much better than just thinking about how shitty I was 10 years ago, or most of the stuff that I say on the podcast has come from that process. So it's like, Ben's going to say this, then I want to say this other thing. And then, what if he says this thing? Oh, that's a good point. Okay. I have to read this book. But what about this other? And so I'm constantly doing this branching thought process. And that's what the audience hears on the pod. But what's your thought process when you meditate?
I just wouldn't say. I think a lot of the thoughts are just sort of these random, fleeting thoughts, not about anything in particular. They're certainly not all some big problem I'm trying to solve at that moment. So obviously, this example is not going to land with you if all you are, in fact, doing when you're thinking about things is trying to solve problems, which apparently is one of the big gulfs between us. So, which I'm not entirely.
Yeah, well, I should say like I'm not negative. Like it's a fun thing for me. I just I have fun doing it, right? Can you give me an example of a thought? Like, obviously, that's not too personal or whatever, that would come into your mind that like, oh, there's a bird, something like that. Like, oh, my sock feels fuzzy.
Something like that. Totally.
Just little observations. Yeah.
Or like, oh, I really like the look of my apartment. Or that's nice. Or that girl was cute, or whatever it was. Wow, I'm such a badass. Wow, I destroyed Vaden in that argument. Fuck, I'm amazing.
God, I rock today. Yeah, I'm the best. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Like little like bits of language for sure. I'd say in that mode, like I'd put that maybe closer to like dreaming or something, right? Where when you're dreaming, your brain is just like, it's not even conscious thought. It's just the off state where stuff is happening. And when you're meditating, I would say you're absolutely solving problems because your conscious mind is trying to stop this little like squirts of language and squirts of thoughts, right?
Yeah, the question is whether all those squirts of thoughts are themselves solving problems. Like, I agree that when you're meditating, you are trying to solve the problem of like, stop thinking so fucking much.
Yeah, well, I would say that those little squirts are just like the problem solving apparatus on standby. Like, it's just what happens when the engine is rumbling but not moving, right? So, of course, your brain has the capacity to form language. Obviously, it does, and make random observations. But that's just the firings of a brain in standby mode. And so, what really matters is all thought problem solving mode when you're meditating is that you're trying to solve the master problem of how do you stop that, right? And so I totally see the meditation example as a clear case of like how difficult it is to control your mind, and the difficulty indicates is problem solving. But it doesn't really matter what we call problem. Like, it's just giving me a lot of insight into the way that you think, and that's really cool because I didn't know that. But I
think we're not going to converge here, but I
feel like we already have converged. So why don't you think we've converged? Because I fully understand what you mean, and maybe you don't want to say that all thought is problem solving, but hopefully the audience at least knows that question can be interpreted in different ways, and given your interpretation, the answer is either yes or no, depending on how you want to define problem, depending on how you want to define like the strength of the problem. Like, maybe if the problem is so easy to solve, like listening to comedy, it doesn't even count, in which case the answer is no. But I feel like, to me, that feels like convergence, but to you, that doesn't feel like convergence.
My general point is you'll consistently do this thing where you say, sure, like each thought is, it's your brain on standby mode. And so sometimes you have these random flickering of thoughts, but the important thought that's going along that point is trying to solve the problem of how to stop thinking. But the claim all thought is problem solving, I was attaching to that claim the proposition that literally every single thought you have is about problem solving.
All conscious thought. All conscious thought. Maybe we could...
Sure, all conscious thought. I mean, I don't know how you'd have unconscious thought exactly.
Sorry. When I mean conscious thought, I mean the when you're meditating, you're trying really hard to not think, and then something happens. So I'm trying to distinguish between the thing that you're consciously trying to do and the stuff that's happening despite that. So let's just reframe the question. Yeah. So it's all conscious thought, problem solving, because that was kind of, again, the what I was thinking about when I answered that question. So I wouldn't put dreams in problem solving mode, for example, but you could still say those are thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's just change the question to is all conscious thought problem solving, because maybe that's a bit more interesting. Or if you don't like that terminology, is all directed thought, all volitional thought, all effortful thought. Like, I'm trying to focus on what the comedian is saying, but I can't stop thinking about how nice my socks feel. I'm just trying to say that I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to ride a bike. I'm not trying to drive a car because I know how to drive the car. So I'm trying to focus on the conversation. That's the kind of thoughts that I think are.
Maybe this is why we're disagreeing the entire time. That's interesting. Okay. I might be closer to agreeing with something like that, because sort of you're always, in some sense, you're trying to always do something, right? I'm not sure what it would be to not be trying to do something at all times. I mean, I have a bit of a hard time with the phrase like volitional thought or directed thought.
Well, so that's an example of a lens, right? So that's an example of a lens that I would bring into a conversation or bring out of. And you could accuse me of just like shifting the ball, but it's like...
No, it's fine to talk about lenses. It's just not fine to, only apply a lens when it useful and dodge coherent questions. If
I was dodging questions, then I just want to apologize because I was not trying to. And so maybe that was just heat of the moment kind of thing. But anyways, yeah, so let's reframe the question.
This is like arguing with like a Kendi style anti-racist who's like, everything is racism. Every single interaction is either racist or anti-racist. And you say, and then you say, no. What about this interaction I have with my mom? And they say, well, it didn't feel racist, but at its core, it's really racist. God. And then you say, what neuroscience is backing this up? And then they say, well, it's just a lens, bro. It's just a lens. That's how I felt arguing with you.
Totally. And like, honestly, I want to apologize if that's how I if that's what I was doing, then that was not my intention. Because I fucking hate that shit. Yeah, totally. And so, fully fair to be annoyed, because that would be super annoying, and it was just the bad communication style on my side. Yeah.
But anyway, so back to volitional thought. Yeah, insofar as that category makes sense, then I think I'd be fine agreeing with something like that, because one, I can't come up with a counterexample on the top of my head, and I think probably definitionally almost volitional thought means there's something you want to do and you're trying to accomplish that thing. I like all of my counterexamples were when thoughts are just kind of randomly popping into your head.
But do you put stand-up comedy in because I would put that in the volitional thought. You're trying to pay attention to what the comedian is saying, right?
I think this is the difference. Like I don't feel like I'm trying to volitionally guess what they're going to say next. And it seems like you do.
No. So I tried to clarify that, yes, sometimes I'm trying to guess, like literally guess the punchline for sure. But other times I'm just listening, and somewhere in the back of my head, it's like, okay, the punchline's coming, right? And if it just fails to come, then at that point I'll be like, okay, where's this guy going?
But normally it doesn't fail to come, right? Like don't go to the extreme case. Like,
but so that's where I wanted to just introduce like the idea of understanding. So before you can even attempt to solve any problem, you have to understand what people are saying, right? And so just listening and trying to understand what they're saying is, I think, just part of the problem solving process, because you can't solve the problem without understanding what the problem is. And so I fold that in, right? But maybe you don't. Maybe you don't like that.
Anyway, I think we're as close as we're going to be, I think.
Okay. So the last thing I wanted to say and then conclude is I think one of the mistakes I made in the previous conversation is I recognized that the way that Popper and myself were defining problems in this sense is basically it's irrefutable, right? And so I'm interested in, and this is not a debate point, this is not me trying to just squeeze out of your criticism, is just interested in when is it permissible, when is it allowed, when is it useful to make this move where you define something in such a way that you basically can't be wrong? Is that ever disallowed? Is that ever allowed? Is that always illegal? I would want to say no. I think that there are some times where you can define something such that you basically can't be wrong. The reason why I don't mind it when Popper does it in this particular context is that he is still distinguishing between biological life and non-biological life. And when he makes this distinction, he is doing this as a way to unify all of biology, but then goes into great detail about the difference between an amoeba solving a problem and Einstein solving a problem, in the sense that when Einstein does it, he allows his ideas to die in his stead. But if the amoeba fails to solve a problem, the amoeba goes under. And so maybe not even as a debate point, but just as a thread that I want to pick up later when we go back to the Conjectures and Refutations series. I really want to talk about his chapter on the problem of irrefutable theories and when is an irrefutable theory still valuable. And I think that was one of the mistakes I made in the first conversation about this subject, because I was trying to highlight that when you have an irrefutable theory, like all thought is problem solving, you can't really prove it to be right or prove it to be wrong. What you can do is show that it's useful. And if it's useful in enough circumstances, then maybe tentatively one might just assume it to be true and move forward. And that was kind of what I was attempting to do badly. And I think that was what part of the cause of the frustration was, because you would give me the example of watching TV, and then I would try to show how it was useful to think about all thought being problem solving, and then I would talk about the producer. And then that would be an illegal move from your perspective because I'm changing the subject. But from my perspective, I was arguing in the wrong direction because I was trying to demonstrate the usefulness of this framework. And so I just wanted to tie a little bow on why I think I moved the conversation in the wrong direction at the beginning, but also by doing so, hint at where I want to try to explore in the CNR series next. And that will be my last concluding statement on the subject. And the final word is yours.
No, I'm looking forward to the chapter. I won't say anything here. I'm afraid if I say anything, we'll get in another argument. So
dude, this is convergence, man. This is sweet convergence.
Tap it here.
Yeah, this is sweet convergence. I don't know what you want to call this, but this sounds like convergence to me. At least we understand each other. Maybe you don't like my view still, but at least we understand each other. So
yeah. I never like your views.
Yeah. All right. Well, love you, buddy. Glad that we're not fighting anymore, and we explored that.
The Discord can go back to peaceful.
Yeah. It was chaos. Yeah. Cool. Well, have a great rest of your afternoon, and fight with you again next time.
All right. Peace out, dude.